Thanks so much for joining me here, Geoff. I want to keep this, a little bit lighthearted. This isn't about compliance necessarily. It's not about investigations. This is about sort of looking forward into sort of some future technology trends, and want to give people a framework of really how to think about the meaning of this technology as it comes to sort of the future, the metaverse, Web3, and things like that. I want to start getting more tangible, right? How have you used technology like Web3 or the metaverse today? What have you actually been doing?
Okay, so I'll start with saying, in terms of the metaverse, nobody has, because we're not there yet. We're not there with the metaverse. So that's the end of the conversation. Sorry, everybody. There's no metaverse. But we do have Web3, right? We have Web3 things coming on. And how do I interact with them? And why don't we have a metaverse? Because the metaverse is the coming together of all those Web3 things. It's the conversations that different Web3 platforms can have, but not just on Web3, but with the real world. What's out there in the real world? What's your identity in the real world? What's it online? And all those different things. So, you can be various things. You could be doing some work on a DAO, right? You could be looking at a decentralized autonomous organization. You maybe get paid for doing that. That's you interacting with Web3. That's going to be the starting point for a lot of people of interacting with what will become the metaverse. It could be running around with Steppen, right? And earning some inflationary tokens that become worth less and less at the moment, but I love Steppen. I think it's a great opportunity for people to do something physically with a Web3 app and try and link those things up.
Just for those people that don't know what Steppen is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Steppen is a move-to-earn platform. The idea is you buy NFT trainers that can let you walk or jog or run, and you will earn rewards depending on the quality of your trainer, how well you look after it, how many steps you do, how much energy you have, and so on and so on.
You're not wearing them today.
I'm not wearing them today.
You're missing out on some NFTs.
Absolutely. But that link up is there. And it's just a case of choosing what you want to get involved in.
Yeah.
And then over time, these things will become interlinked. We'll move away from, we've mentioned multi-chain several times today. That's essential for this creation of what we're going to call the metaverse.
And I think that one of the cool things about the linking up of these different things, and you touched upon it a little bit, is actually using the same sort of token or same authentication mechanism to access these different experiences. And it seems to me that sort of Ontology or really sort of what we're seeing with login with your Ethereum wallet is kind of like the beginning of being able to use one self-sovereign identity to access multiple different experiences. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
I think it's absolutely essential. The idea that you can have your wallet, Ontology have Ontlogin for their login solutions. And the idea that you can have your own address or, something like an ENS, the Ethereum name service, that just allows you access into these portals. And then if you can connect that to your identity as well and give yourself that self-sovereignty over your identity and choosing what you share, when you share it, how you share it, and then ownership over your data that you generate online as well, I think that's where we need to go to get to that metaverse. We need those single point of access that is owned by the individual.
And when you think about sort of monetizing individual data, because this is something that, obviously monetizing your steps is like one version of that, but there's lots of these types of experiments of monetizing individuals' data. What is exciting in that world for you?
Well, I think the thing is we know data is valuable. We know that data has a worth, and at the moment people don't have too much of a say over how that data is monetized. They certainly don't benefit from it.
Right.
You sign away the rights to the data because you want to use a certain social media platform. So somebody else benefits from that financially. And I don't even know if it's that people are going to make a lot of money from this, but I think it's about at least acknowledging whose data it is. And
Right.
tokenization of that, monetization of that is in part acknowledging that ownership and you choosing the value you put on it. And I think it's that choice element. Rather than making a load of money, it's having that choice element to choose to give it to somebody in exchange for something else. And if you can tokenize that and monetize that, rather than it just being a simple, I've not read the terms and conditions, accept, then it's a better position.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this quite a lot when I think about coming across new things inside crypto, is I have to like reserve judgment for a minute, and I have to ask myself, is this asking a fundamentally good question about the status quo? Like for me, Bitcoin was about exactly that. It was saying, let's ask some good questions about who gets to issue money, who gets to decide how we can transfer money from person to person across the world. It's asking fundamentally good questions. It may not be providing all the solutions today, but it's actually fundamentally about asking those right questions. And once you do that, then like some new things will actually happen. Have you seen sort of some of those ecosystems like start to take off in the Ontology ecosystem? I know that there's like lending and other things happening. Like what have you seen start to take off where people are asking good questions?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I mean, obviously one of the core products at Ontology is OntID, this identity solution. And I think, so Wing Finance was launched via Ontology, and they look at under-collateralized lending and low-collateralized lending on a DeFi scale, and trying to hook that up with people controlling digital decentralized credit scores, for instance. So people are in control not only of their identity, but of their own credit score or credit worthiness at the same time, and trying to hook that up into finance as well. But I think it goes beyond that, and one of the really nice things I think is coming out of Ontology at the moment is around that identity solution is being able to choose which parts of your identity you share. So rather than it just being, who has the right to access information about you? Who has the rights to access all of it or some of it? And how often do you get the opportunity to say, okay, I need to give you something. I need to prove my age. I need to prove my address. But I don't want to give you everything. And so I think with decentralized identity online, you have that option then to say, I'm comfortable sharing what you need, but I don't need to give you everything. And we live through things like Cambridge Analytica causing all sorts of problems, asking big questions about the data we give away. And so then giving that back to people and asking that question, who has the right to access your data, I think is one of those important questions.
And I think I think it's exactly right. I mean, we now live in a world where sort of we have moved online in many senses. One of the sort of outstanding questions I guess there is for sort of the metaverse is what types of sort of future crime exist in the metaverse. And there's a guy called Sean Evans who works at FinCEN in the United States who oftentimes gets on stage and talks about Skynet. And I don't want to go full-blown Skynet on the audience at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but what types of crime do you think we're likely to see in the metaverse?
I'm going to be much less dramatic than Skynet, I'm afraid. But
Okay.
look, I think all the stuff you expect, the stuff that everybody's been talking about is going to remain. That's not going away. Where I think, especially cross-chain, bridges are going to be a problem for hackers and so on. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. We know those problems.
Yeah.
I think the metaverse is quite heavily going to be creator-driven in the first instance. I think there's going to be a lot of creator content. We're going to go away from just creators having to fight for a big audience. And I think they'll be allowed to own what they create much easier, and they'll be allowed to create much more nuanced content. So I think one of the big problems will be IP theft. And there's something that really needs to be protected in the metaverse. Who owns the rights to certain things? Who owns the rights to those NFTs? Who owns the rights to those production, whether it be music NFTs, art NFTs? Somebody said earlier, everything can be turned into an NFT. It might be in a physical world. It might only exist in the digital world. But there will be ownership issues, and there will be IP issues around that. And I think that will be a growing concern that needs to be protected. not so much crime, but something else that people are going to have to think about as more and more people build in the metaverse and start building things in there is legislation around data management and identity management of users within the metaverse. You know, how do you manage that data? You know, is it a GDPR sort of thing, or, you know, how are those people? DAOs are going to be doing a lot of work in the metaverse. Do they have the skill set and the tools to properly understand how they manage all that data and the identity that they collect?
Yeah, no, really, really interesting questions. I think both of those, like, I can hear sort of the lawyers in the room sort of rubbing their hands and getting kind of excited about the possibilities of these questions, because they are sort of quite challenging things to understand how we're going to make the judgment calls on some of the balances between sort of individuals having, you know, the freedom to associate, interact, transact, and the protection that we want to give individuals so that they don't get taken advantage of. And like that balance is incredibly hard to strike. In terms of like the theft of intellectual property, just going back to it, we've definitely started to see that in the NFT realm, both sort of outright theft of NFTs, but we also see sort of fake collections popping up and slightly altered things. You know, do we think that you know, these are solvable problems?
I think they absolutely are. I mean, Ontology has a partnership with a company, a project called Rocky, who do music NFTs. And they use the Ontology ID and Ontology tag solutions to actually lock in that identity on the NFTs for the creators, who owns them, who put them together. And I think, you know, that's part of the solution we see of actually putting genuine identity towards the creation of NFTs. And if you start demanding that sort of solution, rather than just buying whatever you see, and then that's where you get to, but it's going to be consumer-led, I think, because if you're just willing to go out and buy a bootleg NFT, you will buy a bootleg NFT. Or, you know, do you want that evidence that this is actually creator-owned? And you look at the identity attached to it and say, okay, I'm confident that this is the thing I should be buying.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to like lots of different consumer goods and services.
Exactly.
And, you know, fake jeans and fake bags and all stuff like that. Like that's part of the economy. That's part of what happens when you do this. But I guess the big difference between sort of, you know, those instances of the big brands coming in and doing NFT projects, which is obviously here, is that you have these content creators directly interacting with their fans. And like that strikes me as like a slightly different relationship than, you know, a big consumer brand and everyone who wants to consume that. Like, it feels to me slightly more community oriented, and that the product being sold is not necessarily sort of a designer item, but is actually the relationship between creator and consumer. You know, do we think that like these content creators who've built big audiences in the major sort of online platforms, do you think that they are going to actually build the same community in these sort of Web3 contexts?
I think absolutely they will, and I think they'll potentially embrace it quite readily as well. I think the advantages they have, so if we're going to, let's distinguish it between Web 2 and Web 3, right? So you've got Web 2 where you've got people creating, and we know, if you look at things like Spotify and you look at some of the royalties people earn, they're pretty low, actually. People don't earn a lot. They don't have a huge amount of ownership over how that content is put out. And on top of that, there's this massive race to as many eyes on the product as possible. Because the royalties are so low, because the pay is so low, what we end up with is creativity actually being slightly stifled, because you just need to get people to see what you're doing. And so if there's a trend, if it's a TikTok dance or whatever trend is going on, people fall into those trends and start racing for those eyes on their product. In a Web3 world, where you've got much more ownership and you keep much more of the value that you create, it actually allows you to be a bit more nuanced in what you create. I think it allows people more freedom and more interactions and more direct control over what they do. And we've seen this with some of the NFTs that get launched, whether we like them or not, whether it be Irene Dow, NFT, or whatever it is, it gives them control over it. And I think creators appreciate that. I think they'll come over. I think they'll build an audience very strongly. How that translates to a massive Web3 scenario, when you've got more creators and more eyes to get, whether that still holds true, hopefully we'll find out.
Well, I think just going back all the way to your beginning proposition about Web3, it reminds me a little bit of, again, sort of bringing some of the NFT into the real world that we've started to see in some of these communities. Like, some of these communities are not just about having a sort of JPEG in your wallet that you can show to someone at a bar, but actually, like, these are actually online, offline communities. You've started to see sort of people actually be able to access physical events and early access to buying new goods and services, or like physical things in the real world from your NFTs. And like, that starts for me to resemble a little bit more of that richer experience as a consumer that actually people are looking for, where they authentically are connecting to other people who are fans of this work, but also can directly interact with the content creator. And that seems to be something that is really starting to take off this year.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. You see, New York went wild just in the last couple of weeks with their NFT projects and Bored Ape parties and all sorts of things going on. I will disagree on one thing, though. I mean, we're not as young as some people. You're younger than me, but still not that young. And, if you look at my children, they actually don't care about that physical, in real world link up. Right. It just being online is enough for them. It just being where they hang out with their friends, their NFTs are on their phones, their digital products are on their computers, on the net. They actually don't need it online. I think you're right. Some people will want that. People will want that real world connection for certain things. But I think there's a younger generation who will be less interested in that than we are.
So maybe, I mean, is one sort of version of this that the older generation, and I don't want to label exactly what generation we're talking about, but the older generation has to have some sort of mediated physical interaction where people are going to mix their sort of Web3 identity with their physical identity. And then maybe sort of just going further into the future, maybe that gets dropped, and you talk a little bit more about sort of different Web3 identities that all are sort of no need to be there, and we can lean back on a much more comfortable chair and just be absorbed into the metaverse.
Yeah, I think for some people that will be the case. Look, if I'm talking about the metaverse, just thinking about the metaverse, my vision of it would be that interaction, that coming together of online, offline, right? I think that is where we really get that right, where your online reputation, your offline reputation, your online credit histories, your identities, the games you play, the jobs you do, the way you get paid, the way you take out loans, the way you own property, I think will be integrated in some way.
So, I mean, I want to sort of end this with something like very practical, right? So, like, there's a room full of people here, some of which have maybe entered the metaverse and who are no longer listening because they're already off in some sort of other land. But there's also people here who are still like paying attention who haven't stepped into the metaverse. For people that are sort of thinking about this space, both on the public sector side, but also on the private sector side, what is the like tactical, practical way that people can like initially get exposed to some of these ideas? Like, what would you sort of recommend to people?
Okay, so I would say go and buy an NFT, see what it's about. Just go and buy one. It doesn't have to be Bored Ape Yacht Club, 100 Ethereum, crazy. You can pick one up at $20, especially now. Buy an NFT, see what it's about. Think about looking at ENS, Ethereum Name Service. Have your wallet set up as your name.eth, Yeah,
ETH.
you know, ETH. You know what I mean? Just to get that done. Set up an online, a digital identity. Go on to Ontology. Get OntID. Set up a digital identity so you know what it is. And the thing I tell most people is, find a DAO for something you're interested in, right? There's so many DAOs there. I guarantee there will be one for something you have an interest in. Join it, talk to people, explore ideas, and contribute. You know, Web3 is a builder economy. It's not passive, it's interactive. Get involved and see what it's about.
I really like that. I feel like we should start Chainalysis DAO. But I want to thank you so much for coming and talking to me about something that usually is like really theoretical and turning it into something really practical. So really appreciate it, Geoff.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you everyone for staying with us in the physical and not leaving into the metaverse. Thank you everyone, and that's the end.